Hi, thanks for joining us for today's video. Please make sure you stay tuned after for a clip from the latest video from our new channel, Paranormally Listed. It's a video about 3 people who predicted their own deaths. Before we start today's video, we want to bring you word from our amazing sponsor, Hunt-A-Killer. Are you looking for an awesome gift for someone in your life? Why not get them the current season of Hunt-A-Killer? Hunt-A-Killer is essentially an escape room in a box that comes every month. The current season sounds amazing, and I can't wait to start playing it myself. Beth Ferris Hendricks grew up in the small island town of Mallory Rock, Maine. Tragically, she died, and her death was ruled an accident. But her sister, Gwen, is convinced Beth was murdered, and she wants to prove it. Now, Gwen needs to investigate the people she's known her entire life. Gwen will need your help to uncover the secrets of this New England island and bring the killer to justice. I've played a few other seasons of Hunt-A-Killer, and I've always been blown away by the story and the props. The props are TV and movie quality. Hunt-A-Killer is a great activity to do at home. We like to order in dinner, get a bottle of wine, and solve that month's box. Hunt-A-Killer is a must-have for people who like puzzles, mysteries, and true crime. Hunt-A-Killer has a great deal for criminally listed viewers. Right now, you can go to huntakiller.com/criminally listed and use the code criminally listed for $10 off your purchase. Once again, make sure you use the code criminally listed for a $10 discount. Do you have what it takes to hunt a killer? Number 3. Shailene Marie Farrell. In the summer of 1994, 18-year-old Shailene Marie Farrell lived in Piqua, Ohio with her family. Piqua is a small city that only had about 20,000 residents. On the morning of August 8, 1994, Shailene told her younger sister, Colleen, that she was going out to purchase an iced tea. She left her family's home in her mother's car, a silver 1981 Chevrolet Malibu, at around 10 a.m. and drove to the grocery store, the Pick and Save. Shailene had started working at the grocery store 2 weeks earlier. Shailene didn't return home that day. That night, an employee at the Pick and Save called the family's home. Shailene had not shown up for her shift that started at 7 p.m. At the time, Shailene's mother was in New Jersey, assisting her mother because she had suffered a fall. Shailene's stepfather, Dwayne Childers, assumed that Shailene decided to skip work to go joyriding with her friends since she had full access to her mother's car. Shortly after getting the call from the Pick and Save, Childers went to work his overnight shift at a local factory. Colleen stayed at home and became more worried about her sister. When Childers returned home in the morning, he was shocked that Shailene had not returned home. Childers and Colleen started calling Shailene's friends. No one had seen or heard from her for over 24 hours. Childers then arranged for Shailene's mother, Darlene, to come home. Childers reported Shailene missing with the police. But the police didn't take the disappearance too seriously. Shailene was 18, and she may have chosen to disappear voluntarily. One reason the police thought this was because weeks earlier, Shailene had moved out and crashed at a friend's home. That was because Darlene caught her smoking marijuana in the house and they had argued. But while Shailene was living with her friend, she called home 4 or 5 times a day. After living with her friend for a few days, she moved back home. Shailene's friends and family were sure that she would never leave without contacting someone. Also, Shailene had no reason to run away. Plus, if she was planning on taking off, she most likely would have brought important items like clothes and as much money as she could get her hands on. But she took nothing with her that indicated she wanted to leave for a long time. The police eventually did a small-scale search for Shailene. They found her mother's car in the parking lot of the Pick and Save. The store's employees were interviewed, and none of them remembered her coming into the store that morning. Eventually, the police surmised that she was kidnapped from the parking lot of the grocery store. However, there were no signs of foul play in the parking lot. so the police thought she might have gotten into the kidnapper's car because she knew him or her or them. But that was just one theory they had. There were other explanations as to why there was no signs of foul play. For example, the kidnapper could have pointed a gun at her and forced her to get into the car quietly. The problem was that no one saw anything. It wasn't long before the case went cold. Nearly 4 years later, in February 1998, a young woman who didn't live far from where Shailene lived went missing. 19-year-old Lynn Topping vanished while she was jogging. 2 weeks later, her body was found buried in a field owned by Timothy Roadheffer. When the body was found, Roadheffer was nowhere to be found. On March 21st, just 2 weeks after Topping's body was found, Roadheffer's dead body was found on a neighboring farm. He had shot himself in the head. Lynn Topping's murder was not connected with Shailene's disappearance, but while Topping was missing, people in the area started talking about what possibly happened to Shailene. Rumors started to swirl, and the police received a tip regarding the possible whereabouts of Shailene's remains. The police used dogs to search an abandoned railroad bed around Union City, Ohio. But they found nothing. In 1998, the police said they had 2 suspects and they were in prisons in different states. They did not reveal their identities, but they said they were acquaintances of Shailene's. The police said that they believed they lured her into their car. They also said a woman may have also been in the car at the time. The police are hoping to find evidence to connect the men to Shailene's disappearance. It's been 27 years since Shailene Farrell went missing. Shailene's family believes that she is dead. Her mother said she wanted to kill whoever was responsible. But now she says she is just tired and wants to know where her daughter's remains are so they can give her a proper burial. Number 2. James and Lois Errada. In September 1964, 43-year-old James Errada was the manager of the Super Safe grocery store in Great Falls, Montana. On the morning of September 4th, 1964, a beer salesman and the produce manager came into the store. In the produce section, they found the dead body of a woman. It was the body of 35-year-old Lois Errada, the wife of James. Lois's feet had been bound with clothesline, and then the clothesline was tied to the rear steel door of the store. She had been stabbed 13 times. Next to her body was a large knife from the produce department. In the back room of the grocery store was the dead body of 43-year-old James. His feet and one of his arms had been bound with the same clothesline that was used to tie up his wife. James had been stabbed 9 times. Both James and Lois had been struck in the head with glass bottles, and they had been gagged with strings from the store's aprons. Tragically, the brutal double homicide left the Erradas 7 children, the oldest being 12, orphans. The police looked around the Erradas' home, and they determined that James' coin collection was missing. Based on this, the police made 2 conclusions. The first is that the killer may have known James and his family. Secondly, James and Lois were probably kidnapped from their home sometime during the night and then brought to the store. The kidnapper or kidnappers probably wanted James to open the safe at the store. But James couldn't open it because the safe was equipped with a time lock. The Errada station wagon was found abandoned in an alley about a block and a half away from their home. Across the street from their home, in a garbage can, was a pair of bloody gloves. 12 days after the murder, 10 of the 12 coin books stolen from the Errada home was found in the Missouri River. They were all bound with wire, and all the coins were missing. The coin books were sent to the FBI in the hopes that some evidence could be found. but nothing of interest was discovered. The police thought that they had 3 strong suspects in the case. All 3 men knew the Erradas. The first was George Sarahada, who was the janitor at the grocery store. He had been there the night of the murder, but he left early. He said he heard some strange sounds that scared him, so he left. He didn't have an alibi for the rest of the night. The second suspect was the store's produce manager, Clarence Anderson. Anderson had a violent temper. Just a few weeks earlier, he and James had gotten into an argument. On the morning the bodies were found, he had unexplained cuts on his hands. Then finally, there was 19-year-old Alan Reevely, a former employee of the store. 2 weeks before the murders, James had fired Reevely because he had stolen $1,100 from the store. The police went to Reevely's family's home the same day the bodies were found. His mother gave the police the pants he wore the night before. The police noted that the pants had been washed and dried. Reevely's family said that the night before he was at home playing Monopoly. Then the whole family went to bed at about 10:30 p.m. It's believed that the Erradas were killed later in the night, so Reevely didn't have a great alibi. But 6 weeks later, Reevely was cleared as a suspect because no physical evidence connected him to the case. Over the next several years, over 100 suspects were questioned and then cleared because their fingerprints didn't match the prints that were found at the crime scene. 2 years after the Erradas were killed, 2 armed men wearing ski masks performed a home invasion on a store manager in Butte, Montana. The 2 men gagged the manager, his wife, and their son. The home invaders told them to do what they said, or what happened to the Erradas would happen to them. The family was ultimately left unharmed. The police thought that the 2 crimes could have been connected, but they found no evidence to prove that. For decades, the Erradas case sat cold. Then, 37 years after the murder, in 2001, the police decided to interview one of their prime suspects. He was the only one of the 3 that was still alive. That was Alan Reevely. Reevely told the detectives that he was innocent, but then he made an odd statement. He said he had asked his parents and his psychiatrist if he could have committed the murders, and they said no. The police thought they had an interesting clue regarding Reevely. It was an unsigned report from 1997. The report was a statement from one of the detective's brothers. In October 1994, Reevely was at a religious retreat. He supposedly said that he was at the crime scene and he found the 2 bodies. This contradicted his original alibi of being home asleep. The police also found a possible motive for the robbery. At the time, Reevely believed that his girlfriend was pregnant. He had argued with his parents over the relationship with the young woman. So the police believed that Reevely was trying to get money to leave the area. It turned out that his girlfriend was not pregnant. The police ended up arresting Reevely on March 15, 2002. The problem was that there was no physical evidence in the case. By all accounts, the investigation was botched from the start. For example, the store was allowed to open 4.5 hours after the bodies were found. At that point, the store had not even been searched properly. The day after the bodies were found, a bloody handprint was found in the cooler, and James's wallet was found in the produce department. None of the evidence was handled properly. For example, the investigators didn't wear gloves. Then, none of the evidence was stored properly. So no physical evidence, like DNA or fingerprints, could be used. A month after Reevely was arrested for the murders, he was charged with 64 counts of theft. Since the murders, Reevely had been fired from 5 jobs for stealing money. He had also taken dozens of checks written out to the food bank and deposited them into his own personal account. He then used the money to pay off his credit card debts and remodel his home. In early 2003, Reevely pleaded guilty to 5 felony counts of theft. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison in order to pay $121,000 in restitution. Alan Reevely went to trial for the murders of the Erradas in February 2004. There was no jury, and just a judge would decide Reevely's fate. The eldest of the Errada children testified, and she said that a man with the same build as Reevely stepped into her room on the night her parents were killed. But there were problems with her identification. The first problem is that she first saw a photograph of Reevely when she was in junior high, and she thought that he was the man who killed her parents ever since. Also, the murders happened 40 years earlier when she was 12, so her memory may not have been reliable. Most damning for the prosecution was that there was absolutely no physical evidence against Reevely. No blood was found on him, and he didn't have any cuts on his hands. His hair, fingerprints, and blood weren't found in the Reevely's home or the grocery store. The trial lasted for 13 weeks. The judge found Reevely not guilty. Reevely was paroled in 2013 after serving about 10 years in prison for the theft convictions. He has stayed out of the news ever since. The murders of James and Lois Errada remain unsolved. Even after 57 years, many people are hoping that the case will eventually be solved. Number 1. The Bilo grocery store murders. Windsor is a small town in North Carolina. In 1993, it only had a population of about 2,000 people. In the town was the Bilo grocery store. On June 6, 1993, 2 employees were closing out the grocery store for the night. A 4-member cleaning crew had come in to clean the store. What the 6 workers didn't know was that a man armed with a handgun was hiding in the store. After they closed, the man approached the store manager, Grover Cecil. Cecil handed over all the cash and money order receipts, which totaled about $3,000. The man then took Cecil and the cashier, Joyce Reason, and led them to the back of the store. Then the robber made Cecil call the 4 members of the cleaning crew to the back butcher room. Once all 6 workers were in the same area, the robber ordered Cecil to duct tape their wrists. After Cecil did as he was ordered, the man bound his wrists with tape. The robber then had them lay down, one on top of another person, in 3 piles. The man said he was a former police officer and he had nothing to lose. He then started shooting the employees, setting 1 bullet into each pile. But then the gun jammed. The gunman then turned the employees onto their stomachs. He grabbed a knife and stabbed Jasper Hardy Jr. in the throat and the back. The knife ended up breaking off in his back. The man then gathered up his money and the keys to the store. He walked out of the grocery store and disappeared into the night. One of the injured employees, Sylvester Welch, managed to get to a phone and he called 911. 47-year-old Grover Cecil, 36-year-old Joyce Reason, and 48-year-old Johnny Rankins were all on top of the piles. They were all pronounced dead at the store. Sylvester Welch was shot when one of the bullets went through one of the other victims and entered him, but he ultimately survived his wound. Jasper Hardy Jr., who was stabbed, also survived. The 6th worker, Thomas Hardy, was uninjured. No arrests have ever been made in the robbery and triple homicide. The suspect was described as a black man with a medium complexion. He was between the ages of 30 and 35 with a slender, solid build. He had a military haircut and light brown slanted eyes. His most notable facial feature was his nose. It had a long, narrow bridge. It looked like it had previously been injured. It's been 28 years since the Bilo murders. The survivors of the deadly robbery and the family and friends of the people who died are still hoping that justice will be served in the case. Thank you so much for watching today's video. And now, here's a clip from our latest video, 3 people who predicted their own deaths, from our new channel, Paranormally Listed. When Kathy was in the 7th grade, a good friend of hers died of heart disease, and she was devastated by the loss. Kathy's mother, Vivian, moved them to Las Vegas, Nevada to give Kathy a better environment to grow up. Kathy made new friends in her new city, and she blossomed. But she had long been plagued by the premonition of her own death. As a kid, Kathy told her family that she was going to die at an early age. When Kathy was 8 years old, her premonitions got more specific, and she told people that she wouldn't live past the age of 16. As her 16th birthday approached, Kathy was stressed out because the feelings that she was going to die became stronger. One day she was crying, and she told her mom that she didn't want to get older. Her mother said, "Kathy, we all have to grow up. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but we all do it." Kathy responded by saying, "I'm not going to." You can find a link to Paranormally Listed on the top left hand of the screen. You can also find a link in the description below this video. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.